as we try so hard, but thank you for being here. And please feel free to ask your questions if you're here live. And if not, please feel free to reach out with any questions you have and post them in the IPN Discord, should you be watching the replay, as most people will be. So thank you for being here with us.
Cool. Did we get the links up on the Discord before I keep going?
Yep.
If we modified the event. Okay, sweet. Awesome. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, sweet. Okay, thanks y'all who are here right now, and then those watching later on. Uma and I are here to talk a little bit about personal statements. Uma has recently gone through this process and is now at UW-Madison doing her PhD. And I have a year or two ago finished my PhD program, but I have helped several people revise and review their personal statements over time, and
Including
had a successful
me.
time had a successful time with mine. So hoping that we can give some input, not only just for it generally if you were going to med school or grad school, but especially so if you're trying to look at psychedelic programs, giving you guys advice for pursuing psychedelic research and things like that without like narrowing your scope too much, avoiding pitfalls with that, and also just like strengthening your focus and your strengths, whatever your background may be, whether you're a traditional student or a non-traditional student, or anything like that. So for the most part, we're just going to talk about, at the beginning, it's going to be more talking at you maybe a little bit about how to approach your personal statements, and then how to be more focused, but then again, also flexible, which is what these programs are looking for, especially for psychedelic field approach. And then we'll have some tips for non-traditional students and things like that, and open up to questions in general. And questions can happen recurrently and throughout as well. But let me admit people. But yeah, that's going to be like our general approach, as well as again, just chip in anytime that you have a question that we may be like missing a detail or certain type of coverage about. Just to start the like introductory, generally, this is like what a really basic personal statement question may look like. However, they can get really specific too and be about like, what is your research interest specifically? Why this program? Describe one event in your life kind of thing. But a very universal prompt is often, please provide a personal statement that discusses something like your academic interests and your goals, as well as qualifications or experiences or reasons for applying to this program. And if it doesn't directly say this, but it's broad enough, then you should at least attack these things, in my opinion. So yeah, we'll go through some of these things. Uma, I don't know if you have any other introductory things you want to say before we like get into some of the nitty gritty, but yeah.
No, sounds perfect. We'll get into it.
Sweet. Okay. So these are just like the basic approaches that I just really want to touch on first before we get into any other advice and like specifics for people and for the psychedelic kind of approach. But most importantly, from my perspective, is that you want to tell your story and that you want to be unique. You want to get attention and understand that like just like any other application, you need to stand out with personal examples or anecdotes, and be substantial and not necessarily like, for lack of a better word, don't be forgettable. There's a lot of statements you can say about how you overcame challenges, but you need to describe like what those challenges were to essentially describe how you got to where you are right now. Why are you applying to this program? Why this program? And like what strengths or what things did you overcome? So again, just like most crucially to me, and like I think for anyone in these types of programs is demonstrating your growth with actual examples and demonstrating your passion. So how the things that you have done up to this point feed into that. Maybe you've done a lot of really cool things in your life, but which ones actually demonstrate the skill set or the overcoming that applies or is related to what you're doing. So before we continue on, Uma, I don't know if you have anything else to add to kind of that point or not.
Yeah, I think for me, and we'll get more into non-traditional students and like a very, winding path later on, but just for in terms of being targeted with your personal statement, your story does matter, but they don't care about like all of your story. And like there would have been so many details that I think would have really rounded out my story. And the advice I kept getting was like, it's really striking a balance of like what is ultimately relevant to explain your path, to prove to them that you are committed to this path and you are a good investment to be accepted to the program. So there are so many motivations that I have for going to this field. I have so many motivations for like picking the research questions I have, but I had to be really specific about what I shared and how it directly informed their buying into like that I'm a good candidate and that they should invest in like take a gamble on me. So really, really think about that linear path to ultimately like why you are a good fit for the program. Because again, like we could have so many different past jobs, so many different experiences, but only if it highlights traits and things about you that would make you a good candidate for what you're applying to now.
Hmm. Yeah, especially if you're applying to different types of programs, because like they are going to be slightly different no matter what. Even if you're applying to all neuro programs, some of them are going to have rotations, some of them will not have like just little things like that, like how you get into a lab or how you don't, what resources they have, what they provide. And so you want to not only like frame your background and your approach, but also like what they have, which is a later point. And as Uma was just like kind of indirectly saying, like showcase yourself. So that's the next point, is like you need to not only talk about your experiences to differentiate yourself and like the story that you have, but talk yourself up. And you literally cannot be too cocky in a personal statement. Like that is something that's been told time and time again. And like you can't, like it feels really uncomfortable and awkward. It's like writing your own recommendation letter, but talk yourself up, explain how your achievements and skills tie those into your stories, to again describe how you are prepared for that program, um, and like highlighting those accomplishments, or whatever like got you there and prepared, but more so prepared you for it.
Yeah. And I'll also add that some of the best advice and kind of like framing of a personal statement I got was that in a typical application to, grad programs of different kinds, nonetheless, with grad programs, like there are many things you cannot control at the end of the day. Like if you're, in December and you're about to apply, like you can't change transcripts anymore. You can't really control what people say on your recommendation letters. You can't really change your background,
Mm-hmm.
your history, your, everything on your CV. The only thing that you really have control over the narrative and like really tying everything together and like putting into context and hyping yourself up is this personal statement. And it's really uncomfortable, but like they are judging you on like what you share on there. And if you think it's important and you don't put it on there, they're not going to think it's important. Like they're not going to comb through your CV and be like, oh, this person got this award or this person had this experience. Like how cool. Like if you don't highlight that yourself in the personal statement. So it feels very uncomfortable, like totally validating that. But like Carli said, like you cannot be too cocky about your past
Mm-hmm.
experiences with this.
Absolutely. So we can get into like examples later, especially if you all have questions about that or not. But again, hinted at earlier, but like the next part of that is like demonstrating the fit. So not only again like how you got to that point, how you are where you are, but really it's almost like an interview, knowing stuff about the program and pointing that out and pinpointing it. So like it should kind of move in this way of like, here's my background, here's how I got to this point, here are some strengths to really show you how prepared I am and like how strong I am and how I'm going to benefit you and how you're going to benefit me. And so that's where like the next part is of like, your program is perfect for me because, and so that's the demonstrate fit, is talking about their resources, talking about their faculty, and talking about whatever else it is that could be applying to you, because this is like supposed to be broad enough here for like medicine, for grad school, whether that's STEM or non-STEM, that kind
Mhm.
of applies for all of this. Um, and so always like do your research and include several specific things that draw you to that program. And I hope that we can like elaborate a little on that, Uma. And then also I want to elaborate too though on how you don't, this is really critical at this point, this part you can screw up if you are too narrow. So if you are like, I want to work with this professor or I want to work on this project, it can also make you not get
Mhm.
accepted if you are really diehard and if you're really narrow. And that's like kind of what I think the next slide before we get into like questions and things or like question and answer is kind of about that flexible fit part. But this is where it's really important that you are tactful in how you demonstrate the fit. I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
elaborate on that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I can think of some very salient examples of just starting my PhD this year and the cohort around me. So I'll first say that, just to make super like the point of what Carli just said, like programs across disciplines, like they're not looking for example, like if you're applying to be a clinical psychologist, like why you would be a great clinical psychology student. They're looking for why you would be a great clinical psychology student in their specific program. So like every personal statement is like, this is why, you know, whether it be true or not, but hopefully it is, hopefully you're applying to programs you actually want to go to, which, you know, really does show in the way you write it. It's like, I fit here, and this is why this specific program is like perfect for me and why I'm perfect for it, because of its unique aspects, not just because it trains clinical psychologists or it trains anthropologists or trains neuroscientists. It's because of exactly like what their values are, what their research focus is. And of course, we're doing this as IPN because we're also talking about, if you want to join the psychedelic field, like how you kind of tailor this to that, you know, it really works to your benefit in certain ways to like speak to the institution's history with doing this work. If you are applying to an institution that has been doing this work, or the different, you know, investigators that are embarking upon it. On the same, like on the flip side though, exactly what Carli said, like everybody. Let me rephrase. Sometimes, because I've applied to clinical psychology programs too, so I actually very much know that path. Like you have direct admit situations where you are applying to like one professor. So like you have to like get in with them or you're not getting in. And then there's like other programs like mine now, the neuroscience PhD program, where you're going to rotate and you're going to,
Mhm.
you need to be a good enough fit for like multiple mentors to then take you on and like pay your bills. So, because that's what they're doing. So it really depends on the program. If it's someone who you have to like be a direct admit for that type of program, then like definitely, you know, go hard on like one or two or three people, because I think sometimes you have to rank the three different people you best
Mhm.
work with and one of them kind of picks you. But if it is a rotation based program, one of the biggest things you can do, the biggest way you can shoot yourself in the foot just in general, is like being, like Carli said, super specific. And that's because even if you're a perfect fit for one PI or one investigator, number one, you could find out later that it's like the most horrible situation you could ever be in and you shouldn't be in that lab. And then you find yourself in a program committed to a thing that like actually doesn't fit you, except for that one person who you had hedged your bets on. So as a person, that's really not going to
Mhm.
help you. But in terms of how they interpret you, programs are looking to see that you're a good fit for overall like their vibe and what their goals are research wise. So that's not just one person. That should be like 3 to 5 people is what I've heard. Like, you know, showing again that you are a good fit for the kinds of people that, you know, faculty that they have in their department. So, you know, different research topics, different ways of going about a similar question. So an example of that is in my program right now, there is one investigator in the psychedelic field who's incredible, who had talked to many students about us joining his lab. And some of us, actually not me, but a lot of people came just to work with him. And he found out after the fact that he doesn't have funding to take on a student. So there are now students who like kind of
Mhm.
found their way in there. They obviously convinced the program that they're a good fit for like everybody, but you know, they really truly came for this one person, and this one person cannot take the student and they're devastated. And so for both parties involved, it's really good like to make sure that you're getting into a situation where you have multiple options that you'd be genuinely content or happy with, you know, spending a huge chunk of your life and your work, you know, with. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'm sure this will come up more as we get into like narrowing down specifically with psychedelics, but the biggest advice and maybe the scariest advice I heard from someone in passing at one conference who had applied to a bunch of programs a year before me said that she'd applied to like 9 programs. She's a very, very like top candidate in my field. She got flat out rejected from every single program where in her personal statement, she said, I want to study psychedelics. And then she got an interview and accepted to almost all programs where she said, I want to study, you know, psychiatric conditions. And one avenue of interest I have is psychedelic research.
Mhm.
She accidentally did that because she thought that the programs that had, you know, a huge psychedelic, you know, field or like a lot of people in a center, like they would really want to hear like, you know, she wants to study psychedelics and therefore like being that narrow would show that she's a really good fit for the program. And then she happened to be more general with other programs that only had like 1 or 2 people so that it looked like she's a good fit broadly, but it worked against her because, you know, people like for whatever reason at this point institutions seem
Mhm.
to not want someone who like wants to go to grad school specifically, like they only want to study psychedelics. That doesn't mean that you're not that's not what you want to do. Like you definitely could have that within you, but I would highly recommend framing it within a larger question of like, well, why do you want to study psychedelics? Like not like what question or what issue or what problem is that solving that you ultimately are interested in? and maybe psychedelics is one path and something else is another path. And
Hmm.
I attribute getting into a program that she ended up getting rejected from because I didn't say that. I said I wanted to
Yeah.
study psychiatric disorders. So anyway, all that to say, if that can share one thing with you, it's like, don't say I want to study psychedelics.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's already narrowing in one way. Like even in my experience when I was applying and people are applying, it's already narrowing to say you're like so committed to one thing. I remember like with my grad program, they really like liked the people that were more open. Again, it was a rotation program, but that's not even like adding on the stigma layer that psychedelics has. So like in either case, whatever the reason may be, I think that just like the personal statement is not the place to do it unless it's one of those institutions where you are 100%, you've already spoken to that professor and you that PI, you already know you're going to try to work with them. They've already like given you, like the go ahead and said, "Hey, like mention in your personal statement that like you want to work with me because like I want to work with you." Otherwise, like I think that it's best to talk about the things that you care about. Like Uma just said, like take it to a higher level of like what dimension of psychedelic therapy or research or mechanism are you interested in, law, whatever that is. And then be talking about that like bigger framework because then it's still applicable when you get into the program and it's not going to like prevent you at all from what you do when you get into the program. If anything, it's just like you're hitting the barrier of those people who are, like deciding if you get into the program or not.
I sorry, I just want to add one more thing because this I feel
Mhm.
like this is so important. Like, first of all, in terms of admissions teams, and like I've just been learning more about that and how like scary it is, frankly, like how subjective it is. But like a whole program isn't reviewing you. Like certain people
Yeah.
on a committee are reviewing you, which is completely determined at random. You have no idea like what their biases are, what their stigmas are.
Mhm.
And so you want to make sure you're speaking authentically, but also to where like almost if not everybody on an admissions committee can would consider you to be a safe candidate, quote unquote. And it is terrifying. I'm seeing that in the chat, but I mean, honestly, it's kind of humbling. Like we attribute so much meaning to any rejection or like things not working out when it's so subjective. You could have just landed in someone's, hands that just has bias against your experience, and that sucks. But it's not a reflection of you and your lack of value. And conversely, someone else might get in because like they just struck the chord of someone who has a similar experience who happens to be reading their personal
Right.
statement. So it's so random. But all that to say, like try to increase your chances by not like immediately falling into the category of bias. And then the last thing I'll say is that you also have no idea like who at an institution is planning to starting to do
Mhm.
psychedelic research. Like so a program may think that they don't really have like enough people for you if you say that you want to just do psychedelic work, and then they might reject you because they're like, oh, like we don't have PIs, but like actually
Yeah.
there are PIs getting ready to do the psychedelic research, but like the program doesn't know that. So that's why like keep your basket open.
Hmm.
Like you can use it as an example maybe if you feel like that's a safe enough program to say, for example, one line of research I'm interested in is this psychedelics, also blah blah blah. So like yeah, that's my thought on that.
Yeah. No, awesome. 100%. And I think I was gonna like even take it out like a layer back that you and I often do, Emma, of like if especially this is more like in the research context, but yeah, like don't have all your eggs in that basket essentially, and like try to do the techniques or whatever. Like try to have certain mentors that are like tangentially related because either they can get involved, you can write your own grant, you can get involved in it. Like just don't limit yourself by only applying to certain psychedelic centers and things like that. Yeah, for sure.
Because
Whether
anyone
that's
can get
yeah.
into it if they're willing. They just have to be willing, get money, and apply and get for like licenses. So like it's possible and you can bring that to the table, which also
Mhm.
leads to like don't get discouraged and feel like you have to only apply to institutions that are doing this the work you want right this second. Like it's exploding. We're in such a time right now. Like Carli's experience, like she'll sure talk about it more, but it's so inspiring that like she didn't like apply at the time because years ago she's so old.
Old.
I'm just kidding. No, she's Dr. Domenico came in a time where there's a lot of stigma, and she got into her program and then found herself in a lab where she got to do LSD research in rats that was like seminal. So it can happen for everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Uma. Yeah, I was at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, where there was absolutely no psychedelic research. And I had seen like one of the labs that I was really like curious about switching into because my lab kind of collapsed at the time, and I was doing EPhys, electrophysiology, and I had seen that we had like a lab nearby in the universe, like in the institution had a grant for LSD research. And so I often like recommend to people like look at nih.gov. You can like search any institution, you can like search the word hallucinogen, psychedelic, LSD, whatever, and you'll find out that a lot of these labs can have grants and have funding that are not in a psychedelic center, like that are not at all like known for being this big like psychedelic area or anything. And so it's just like one lab doing the studies, and ended up being like super exciting work in the field, and absolutely like yeah had not been investigated whatsoever for hallucinations, memory and visual areas. But that's a really good way to be looking into not just like what grants are like, because for in this case it was mounting, like the grant had been given but had not, the research had not really started yet. So sometimes that can happen where you already have the like government permissions but you don't have like the personnel necessarily, and that stuff just goes overlooked sometimes whenever it's really an opportunity for you. That and or just like other techniques that are really relevant and useful that you may do in like grad school and then go do a postdoc at Hopkins, right? And their Center for Psychedelic Research or something like that. So you just like learn how to do EEG or fMRI or something like that, and then you can move on in that
Or
way.
just becoming a therapist or becoming an MD or being a
Yeah.
lawyer, becoming really anything.
Yeah. Thank you for broadening it because I often narrow it to my experience for sure. I think the last parts of this slide obviously are like just kind of clear, but like use a formal and engaging tone, just to like touch on and get feedback. So yeah, the final recommendations for just your approach of your your personal statement is get at least two or three people to like read your personal statement and just let you know if it's like unique, if it's really like telling your story. It's like uncomfortable, of course, especially because you're talking yourself up. But it's super helpful just for grammar's sake, but as well as for making sure again that you are giving actual anecdotes, you are giving substance to why you are applying and why that program is the one.
And for people who are reading your applicate or proofreading for you, I'd also recommend like specific for specific programs, like sending the link to the application like website for a specific program so that because
Mm,
oftentimes, and this is also part of like what I would hope that you take from this, like in the programs, like what do they want from a candidate? They have like the keywords that they want basically highlighted about the person, like whether you highlight it yourself or like letter of recommender or recommendation people highlight for you, like they have traits, right? So with that, like we get so lost in the weeds of our own story, which is why we should have someone read it. Also, when you
mhm.
have someone read it, have them look at the website so they could be like, this is what they want. Are you reflecting that? Like from a third party
Yeah.
perspective. And they also like getting back to our original point of like telling your story in an effective way. Like we do get lost in the weeds of our story, feeling like we need to include this detail and that detail, or
Yeah.
otherwise it doesn't make sense. And other people can be brutally honest and be like, this is like scattered and you need to just like get to the point and like you can eliminate certain things about yourself and just make the story more cohesive and powerful. So it's always
Mhm.
helpful to get someone to read. I was really scared of that. I thought people just like weren't going to get me and get it, especially because I have such a non-traditional background. So I had the story in my head that like people with traditional backgrounds like will understand why I'm writing the way I'm writing. And then I got over that and then I got people to write it and they only enhanced it for me and it worked out. So I just please do it. Get mentors, get people who have done what you want to do, and then also get people in your life who are not as in your field, but who just know you as a person and can see you shining through.
Mhm. Absolutely. The last thing I'd add too is this is like a probably like a higher level, more difficult detail to try to incorporate, and it's going to sound like a little subjective or vague now. But if you can somehow have your story and your anecdote be really paralleling the other dimensions of like what you're talking about. If your conclusion, you're like you should have a really powerful conclusion, and like if somehow it can incorporate some type of aspect or like impetus or like motion that your anecdote starts with, your introduction starts with, it's always good, right, to like come full circle. And again, like it sounds, it's hard to give an example without like pulling I can't remember my personal statement was talking about, but in any case, like Uma was saying, if you think you're getting lost in the weeds or you're talking about too many things, try to pull something that could like metaphorically be paralleling either some aspect of your achievements or your preparation, or like why you did this, and then how you can all culminate that and like come back to the conclusion. Again, a little bit like Harry to be describing that, but I think that's kind of your like a last big tip if you can like pull it all together. Although these are of course very difficult to write. Cool. Well, I think that's all I really have for like the like main approach steps. So if we want to kind of get into the more, we can like talk about, I'll exit the screen, I think, because I think that it's just talking about, I guess we can do the be focused and be flexible again, and especially in the context of psychedelics. And then we'll talk about non-traditional approach and just kind of get into any discussion that comes forth. So I'll stop sharing for now. Um, and we can again get more into that. Is immersive what I want here? I don't know. Nope. I don't know what immersive does. You can see you, right, Uma? Okay. I don't know what that is. That's fun. Okay. Yeah, so being flexible or being focused but flexible, we already talked about that generally with any kind of program application. Um, but yeah, I don't know if you want to touch on it with psychedelics or not.
Totally. I I think that the way I approach thinking about this is you have an interest in psychedelics, likely because you're watching this and you're in IPN, right? But what is the broader purpose of why you're interested in psychedelics? Like, obvious, and this opens up to so many different disciplines, so many different domains. I think some of the most like
Mhm.
obvious ones or the easiest ones to talk about are like, looking at them as novel therapeutics or, modes of healing, whether it's through the psychological lens, through the neurobiological lens, through the pharmacological lens. You can take it all the way to, from the legal lens, policy lens, like you want or you have an interest in the opportunity for change within the field. And that's beautiful and that's amazing. And like what people want to admit you on and what people want to buy into your like skill set on is the purpose of why you want to take on that vocation. Because if it's
Mhm.
about a specific subject and it's limited in a sense to just psychedelics, who knows what the future will hold? Like, what if in like 5 years, this is probably not going to happen, but like in 5 years, everything in your dream world of like the utopia of psychedelics is like squared away. Everything's I'm just making assumptions here, but everything is legalized, it's supported, the infrastructure in place, life is great. What are you going to do then? Like
Mhm.
I mean, unless, you're a therapist, like what are you going to do then? Like people want to know that your intention is something that could last a lifetime because most of the time with professional school, with like graduate school, they're investing in you. They're investing in you by like giving you their stamp of approval that like we've vetted them as a candidate and we're going to train them. Oftentimes, not in all programs, but in oftentimes you're getting paid to do this work as a graduate student. Like that's a huge investment, and for them to perceive you as a candidate that's only interested in like very like one topic and one outcome would really really limit you in their mind. So again, just to emphasize what I said before, like make it very clear that if you're going to bring up psychedelics in the first place, which Carli touched on is already debatable given the general stigma and like the depending on who you're where you're applying, but even if you feel safe bringing it up, it cannot be like the end all be all. It has to be in
Mhm.
service of a bigger goal.
Yeah. Now it's funny you say that because like it seems like it's really again specific to psychedelics, but like even when I was applying, people were saying this for other things too. They were like, do not just say you were interested in cancer. They're saying like you can talk about like that why you're motivated by studying cancer, like if somebody in your life like impacted you or whatever, if you had this experience or another. But like if you say that that's all you want to study, they will have in mind, well, what happens if it is all solved? Like, what if Alzheimer's is solved and now, like, that was all that you came in here for was because your passion was to solve this problem? It's not like what is the logic of that? It's why that exactly. And so it seems again like it seems like it could just be applied to psychedelics, but no matter what you're doing, no matter how you're framing it, be thinking of it in that like bigger scope of why. Why are you passionate? And like what issues do you want to solve and like how do you want to solve them and like why how are you adaptable? Because that was the big thing for the programs too that I was applying for is they want to see that you are resilient, you are adaptable, and that really like your passion for whatever topic that you're willing to investigate is going to like cover a breadth of reasons and not just because you have one answer or like one thing to solve or like one big motivator or something to that effect.
And also intuitively, like for everybody here, and especially people who have like changed career paths or like are pivoting in their life, like
Mhm.
think about the fact that you're now changing and how fast and how quickly you've changed as a human in general. Then to think that you might tether yourself to a specific question or a specific, subfield for the rest of your life, like you might change in a year, like you might change and if but what won't change for you is like your general motivation for a specific like, you know whatever program. Hopefully it's like whatever skills you're going to get from that program. I won't even say like the field necessarily, because if we're being honest, like people graduate from a field and then they like go somewhere else completely, but what they take with them are the skills. And so if you're hedging your bets on the kinds of like analytical skills, the kind of practicum skills, the kind of technical skills that you might be getting from dedicating yourself to a program of some sorts, and then you can take that and do something else, like programs want to see that you are thinking that deeply. They really want to see that you've thought very hard
Mhm.
about why you're potentially dedicating your life to this many years and this hard of work. Cause like it's not easy and it's fun, but it's not fun. So like they want to know that you're prepared. You've really thought deeply about this too.
Yeah, that's
And
a
oh,
really
and
great point.
I also want to talk about what Carli brought up, because Carli and I have talked about this at length. Like, I am lucky enough to where I found myself in a program that I have ample opportunity to do exactly the work I want to do. But again, I had to sell myself as someone who'd be okay doing on the broad scale psychiatric research. But I came from an institution where I
Mm,
had literally zero access. Like they didn't even say the word psychedelic. Like at my last
yeah.
institution, I was like the dark horse in that situation. So to come from like somewhere where I had no access, and as I embarked upon my master's degree in neuroscience to then do a PhD, I literally used to message Carli as like someone in IPN, like, hey, like I don't know how to get experience relevant to like psychedelic work. Like, how do I pick a lab to do my master's work in? And her answer is like forever shaped the way I look at this. She was like, go learn how to do research. Like in my case, like go join a lab that like teaches you how to think and how to, do techniques. And this can apply to any field, but for the purposes of this was science. And then you're going to sell yourself to a program like you learned how to do research. You love doing research. Now you want to go research this other thing. And that's exactly what happened. And so for anyone in the space of applying right now, yeah, totally apply to programs that like are outwardly supportive of what you want to do, and that even you're not going to say that you only want to do psychedelic work, but likely in your mind that if you get in, you're probably going to be able to do that. However, there are only so many spots available in those programs,
Mhm.
and I would hate for you to leave thinking like, oh, if I don't get into like Johns Hopkins or UW-Madison or UC Berkeley or whoever's the very limited schools doing this work, then I can't do it. Because number one, you can go learn how to do the skills that will then take you to do that ultimately, and two, you can also like be skilled enough to bring your own ideas into a new
Yeah,
institution, a new program. So like really think about again the underpinnings of why you're doing what you're doing, what skills you would need to be able to go do that work, and then go apply it to what you want to do.
100%. Yeah, thanks for that, Uma. I also don't know if you wanna touch on a little bit, it's a topic that had come up a while back where it was like, if people do, like, again, I don't encourage you really to talk about psychedelics and most of your applications, especially personal statements. Like, I just don't think it's a good word to use. Um, and so in the past, it's been like, if you're going to, if like that's something that for the program you're applying for or something like that, you're going to use that direct framework. Um, I would try to be, I guess, just careful with wording. And anyway, I don't know if you had commentary on that as well, but it's like in the past, it talks about like, talk about maybe like, instead of saying the word like psychedelic or something like that, you could be like, um, you know, you could
Novel
use like
therapeutics.
novel therapeutics. Yeah, things like that are definitely more, yeah, are better to use. It's just something I feel like if we are remiss to discuss that or to say that would be wrong.
Totally. So
Yeah.
my exact tagline was, studying the like, which is true, studying the, neurobiological underpinnings and mechanisms that drive psychiatric disease, and studying and developing novel therapeutics, novel compounds, such as, and I said psychedelic very intentionally because I knew where I was applying, but I could have
Mhm.
not said that. And you could replace that with, like psychoplastogen. That's a new word that's come out,
Mhm.
in the field that like
Perfect.
kind of says it, but also opens you to like compounds that are not psychedelic anymore. And in general, like you don't have to say it to get across that you want to do that. And so to apply that to other fields, like if you're interested in, psychedelic assisted therapy as a psychiatrist or a clinician, a master's level therapist or a PhD level therapist, like psychologist, you could talk about, developing novel interventions for psychological conditions, novel therapeutic frameworks, or for policy programs, legal programs, like exploring frontiers for novel for the regulatory landscape for novel psychiatric compounds. That's the first thing that comes to mind. I know there's other applications outside of psychiatric conditions, but just making it broader while still, like, for example, psychedelics be one of them if you happen to say the word. Also, this should be said while we're on the topic of the word.
Mhm.
It is not looked at favorably to talk, for the most part, to my knowledge, to like at all disclose your own like lived experience with psychedelics. Like
Oh, good point.
it,
We
and,
should
and
definitely
I
mention that.
and I wish it were different, but given where we are academically and legally and all of the things, I mean, in general, and this kind of lends itself to non-traditional backgrounds and stuff too, like it's only helpful to talk about your lived experience and your past in general with conditions or whatever, if it, feeds into like explaining your past and your story and or like your motivations for moving forward. But like having lived experience with psychedelics will not in any way and show an institution that like you are a good candidate, therefore to go study it, because that's not good enough of a reason, number one. And two, there's so much stigma that that's not even a question of if you should disclose it or not at this
Mhm.
point. Just don't. And if people
100%.
ask you, because this has happened, if people in power, if people who are evaluating you ask you, like especially in a formal, interview setting, should you get to that point, let alone informal setting, like unless you have a longstanding relationship with this person, or like just don't disclose it. It's just like
Yeah.
there's so many ways people want to trap you to like find out where you actually lie in the spectrum, and it's really best to just maintain, you can always advocate for, like, you advocate for legalization and to study for it if that's what you believe, but like I'm guessing you are if you're an IPN, but don't disclose it, don't get trapped.
100%. That's such a good point. I completely forgot to, yeah, like to even include that of the anecdotal experience. 'Cause we're talking about telling your story and things like that, but do not make your story about, yeah, about a psychedelic experience, for the sake of personal sake. You can, but it's not going to probably pan out, essentially.
And I
Absolutely.
think that also speaks to like the story part as well. Like when they ask us for their story, because they do say that in their verbiage and typically in programs, like talking about what they want in their personal statement, like they don't actually, as much as I wish they did, like they don't really want to know like who you are. Like they want to know who you are related to the goal of what they
Hmm.
want you to do. So like therefore doing psychedelics wouldn't like really be relevant anyway, but also in general, like ultimately just think of it, and this is not a bad thing, but like as they have very selfish specific interests of they need to have good outcomes and trained like very, high level successful people, like what can you show about your past and your experience that shows them that you are that, not just like sharing things about yourself for the sake of sharing them, which again I wish that they considered you more holistically. I think one exception to that is medical school. I think in medical school applications I've heard that there's they do want to know more about like your, not necessarily who you are, but like your service to medicine outside of like the research and outside of like classes, so like volunteering and commitments to things, and but still it's in service of being like a physician, not like a
Hmm.
good person, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Yeah, I didn't know on that note too if you were down to comment a little bit now if we transition to like advice for non-traditional students going into this environment.
Definitely, that's a great segue. It's almost like you planned it. um so I think it's so important to bring up because we have a community of many non-traditional students, obviously me included because I'm talking about this, but also because in related to personal statements, we talk so much about, explaining our background and talking about our story. And so the inadvertent question comes up of, well, if I have a story that does not follow the linear academic path and, perhaps has holes in it, has time lapsed since education, has gaps in education, has, very unrelated seemingly like education from the past, has jobs that don't make sense to people, has, a huge thing is like, bad grades based on past experiences and whatnot. Like, how does one address that? Does one address that in a personal statement? And how do you do it in a way that's not held against you? And the truth is, upfront, I'll tell you, like, once again, like, it is so subjective, like, who ends up getting the application in your hands and evaluating you. So, like, no matter what, whether you're a non-traditional student or not, you are subject to the bias of the person holding your application. However, when you're a non-traditional student, given that they're going to evaluate the rest of your materials and it's probably going to out you, it's one of those identities that you don't have consent in outing, unfortunately. Like, there are other parts that we could choose to hide or not hide based on the stigma, but that's not one of them, because it's going to be evident in your CV, in your transcript, etc. So the question becomes, like, how do you frame it in a way that shows that that actually gets turned into a positive in their eyes? And I'm not talking about like toxic positivity or like anything like that, but how does it get framed to explain that it actually reinforces and shows even more that you're passionate about what you want to do? And there is always a way to turn your past into a strength in their eyes if you think about it through that length, or through that framework. So for me, some examples are, like, I had a huge gap in my education. I was in unrelated fields. I had a 1.83 GPA at my worst. And I didn't have the same level of experience and the number of experiences other people had. So that all works against me, right? But for me, there was a reason that all of that happened. And for me personally, those reasons were illnesses, psychiatric and physical illnesses. And so I didn't have to go like write a sob story necessarily in my personal statement about, like, I never wanted to come off like, oh, you should pity me and like you should pick me because like my life's been hard. And so like you should like give me concessions. It was never that. What it was is, I have done the hard work. And what you're seeing in my past is because I have been so deeply affected by the very things that now I want to study. I have now since gotten treatment, and I have, in their eyes, like proven to them via like my research and my grades that like I can do this. And all of this fuels why I want to do it now. So it was a way for me to address the past, but also give them a framework for how I got to where I want to go. And that also applies to transitioning disciplines, because, psychology does not teach you what a neuron is or what a gene is or what axons are or anything like that. At least my program didn't. And so I had to go do the work and get a different, for me, I got a degree in neuroscience, but other people might not do so. Hugely, people can pivot fields by getting, hands-on research or clinical or, internship experience in the field that they want to, and then they can pivot. But that does have to be addressed in your application. So once again, a personal statement is a way for you to explain why you were interested in a field before, and then how you came to where you're going now. And that's always a way that can be turned into a positive for programs, because it shows that you've thought deeply about what you want to do. And going back to what we've talked about earlier, you have this like overarching goal or question that maybe like you started in one discipline or avenue to answer, and then you learned and you grew and you realized you want to answer in a different way or come to a different, discipline. So as long as you share your story and the differences from the norm in your story in a way that emphasizes to them why you are a great candidate, because it shows you're even more committed, that you've overcome even more to be able to get to where you are. You're even more dedicated to to do this program and to suffer, frankly, because it is hard. Grad school is hard. So like, if you're showing them that you're older and that you have other choices in life and you're still
You
choosing to do
still want
this,
to do it. Yeah.
exactly, like you're actually like a great sell. And this is like I learned that I had so much fear about applying, and that I wasn't good enough and I'm not going to get in, whatever. In my particular program, they have this like NIH grant where they get to put a few students on this funding thing to get them basically like I get funded longer than other students. And I learned that I'm on that grant. And it's because apparently from my application and them getting to know me, they think I'm one of the most likely to succeed and stick out the program. And they want to have like positive outcomes. I only share that because I thought that my past would work against me and that they would think I'm a flight risk. But actually, because of whatever they perceived via my like dedication, whoever read it, I got lucky enough and they decided I'm actually a better bet because I have thought hard about subjecting myself to this torture. So I just wanted to share all that with all of you so that you can feel empowered to know that like your past can be different than the students you see around you. Like I still feel imposter syndrome every day about the students who have followed a very traditional path, and that's okay. And you have your own strengths. And as long as you believe that and you get that across, you have to believe it, or at least somewhat believe it to get it across via word, but make sure you address it, but only address it to the point of this makes me stronger, not like give me a concession because things were hard for me. Because that might be true. And I wish we did have a world where equity was the case. But given our current framework, like frame it as a positive and show them, spoon feed to them why you're a good candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Uma. 100% wish it were down to equity as well. But so just use that to your, yeah, as your fuel. I don't know if we want to open it up. I don't know if you guys have questions or not, and if not, we'll just keep like chiming in with things that appear in our mental space based on what we've been talking about now. But if you have specific questions or not, for your personal statements or certain questions that you have, we're down to help. We're also down to, I think I speak for Uma here, but probably to her, I know she's super busy with grad school, but I'm down to help review and give feedback. If you guys want to send anything or submit stuff to us, with probably, you know, like a few days at least of time before you need to submit it or something, but definitely down to give feedback or just advice offline as well. But if you have any specific questions.
Off the cuff, I would recommend using Discord to send it. If you feel comfortable, send it publicly so other people can learn. But if you don't, then just message us privately on Discord.
DM,
That
yeah.
way it's easy to send things. But I am seeing the comments right now. Y'all are awesome. I love that you're feeling supported by this. And I'm seeing someone who says that they're so scared right now. That's why we're doing this, because you're not alone. And I actually, while people were getting questions, and feel free to raise your hand if you have a question, but like, I think this should be said out loud. Like, if you get rejected, I don't even like that word, but quote unquote rejected, like that is not a reflection of your value or your capabilities. It could be that, you know, they don't, like you got in the hands of the wrong person, and or maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's just you have the opportunity to get more experience, be prepared, and feel even more affirmed, and like you can apply next year, you can apply the year after. I know it's not ideal, but it may be the best thing that ever happened to you. Like I said, I applied to clinical psychology programs. I ended up getting in, and I still chose not to go, but I got into like the quote unquote safety schools that like I actually never wanted to go to. And I realized, oh, maybe I should just try this neuroscience master's and I'll go back to psychology later. I have not gone back to psychology. I am now I am now in neuroscience, and that would never have happened had I just like, oh, I need to force this timeline. It needs to happen this way. So just let life happen for you too. You can only do so
Mm-hmm.
much, and it will work out.
It will. And to me, in a lot of ways, the personal statement is like, I think it's in a very few percent chance does it make you. I would say like for like 5 to 10% of people, maybe they write a statement that really makes their application. But otherwise, you just want to be unique, be professional and grammatical, talk yourself up, and don't say something really wrong. Basically,
Yeah.
like in my
Because
opinion,
it
it's
can
just
break you.
be yeah, it can 75% break you. I feel like it's almost engineered to break an application. And so, and that's the scary part. Like when you said like you feel scared, like just be unique without saying something that can alienate you or be like too narrowing or stigmatizing essentially. And as long as you do that, and you have someone give you feedback, like if you have 2 or 3 close loved ones, like one person who is like experienced like professional degree or like has like writing experience or something like that, that tells you that it looks good, like you're going to be golden. And I would not stress out too much about it other than, yeah, just making sure.
Yeah. And yeah, like Carly said, it won't necessarily make you, but it will break you. I've also heard way too many times from people who've been on admissions committees that like they find like some top candidate like put the wrong name of the school in their personal statement because they forgot to control F. So like small things like that, just, you know, don't go overboard, but just check for small things. And also, again, circling back to the content, like, you know, they read hundreds, maybe thousands of these applications. So definitely like make yourself stand out in how poignant you speak, but also it's not like a creative writing exercise. Like, and the purpose of this workshop was to specifically talk about people related to the psychedelic field who want to apply to grad school and the caveats to that personal statement. So we didn't necessarily give you like every detail of what should be in a personal statement. So I'd recommend like go on the internet and look up examples of personal statements that were successful for people in your field and then apply what we said to that. But what you will see in those personal statements is they're, somewhat boring to read. They're not like the most riveting. It's not, unless you're applying to a creative writing application, it follows a specific formula, but with that, interject your lived experience and your truth and you'll be good. But it doesn't, if you don't find it to be like a novel or the most interesting thing, like that's by design.
For sure. For sure. Try like ChatGPT for, I don't know, examples or something. Cool. Thanks so
People are
much, Uma. Yeah.
I was saying people are really generous on the internet nowadays. They all have like websites where they have their, examples of personal statements for so many different fields to take advantage. But then take what we said about the caveats, like everything about psychedelics, don't narrow down, be honest, and you'll be great. But thanks so much for coming, everyone. And thank you, Carli, for having this.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for being here. Again, feel free to reach out. Even if you're like watching the recording, as long as you have time and you give us a good enough heads up, you're welcome to reach out, or reach out publicly on Discord or privately with us. And we've got Allison said she's found some videos on YouTube. People read their stuff out loud as well. So yeah, just look up those resources and again, reach out for more advice. But I hope that we gave you guys decent insights for applying and things to avoid and, try to do for any type of program, psychedelics or not. Thank y'all so much. I'm going to stop the recording now.